Welcome. I'm Rajemed Eskandone, founder and director of The Antidote, and your guide today as we embark on exploring a new topic in the series called High Five. I invite you to join with me as together we learn from one of the many pioneers of our time. Enjoy. I want to welcome you to part 2 of my conversation with Catherine Smart, who is a high school teacher of German. And I just spoke to her in part 1 about her pivot to teaching 100% online. And now I just wanted to shift to talking to her a little bit about her experience with COVID, because her and her family contracted COVID. It was in the summer, is that, have I got that correct?
I could tell you the exact day. June 12th.
Well, June 12th. Wow.
June 12th. I know this because it was the last day of school. We were home from March until June, but in the state, we live in Virginia, and the state had closed down until June 10th. And so we were all, when they said it in March, we were all, oh, how will we ever? And then June 10th rolled around and we're like, oh, we can do this. So they lifted restrictions and you could now go in and do whatever they had like some rubric that they lifted it to. And our college son had moved home because the dorms closed, and he'd been, a good boy, and he had stayed home, and the gyms closed. So we bought some secondhand gym equipment and put it in the garage, and he and his curated group of buddies who were not going out and hang out with other people, the 4 of them were their own bubble. They would come and work out in our garage every day. And it was a nice kind of time, like kind of coming up with new things to replace old patterns that we'd done. And then one of his friends said, hey, I have relatives in South Carolina. We'd like to go down and visit. And, 3 of them were going to go. And my husband and I hemmed and hawed, and we're like, Well, we finally decided to let him go because the state had opened up and he was going to be good. And at this point, we didn't know anybody who had it. We didn't know. It was just this sort of terror, the Chiron at the bottom of every news thing, and New York was sort of out of the woods by this point. So we're like, well, how bad can it be? Well, they went down and they weren't like actively seeking people, but they were on beaches, and they were, I'm sure, interacting. I'm not sure what it was. I know they were in restaurants with their masks off, whatever that was. But he came home a day early because he said, Mom, I'm just so tired. And we thought, well, that's what happens when you are, sleeping 2 hours a night or whatever. So we all sat together in the living room for probably 30 minutes, like an episode of, some sitcom or something long. And then, so he was on one couch, sleeping, and we were sort of arrayed. We weren't near enough for there to be, at the time, everybody thought it was just droplets. There is no doubt in my mind that it's aerosol because we weren't close enough for long enough for that to be a thing. Then he went up to his room and played Xbox all weekend, and we kind of did, what you do on weekends, like chores and stuff, and didn't really interact with him in person. Like we would always kind of, be in the house at a different time than him. So then Monday, he was on his way to work and called me and he said, Mom, my friend who was on the trip with him, one of the 2 kids in the car, tested positive. What should I do? And I was like, you should not go to work. So we set up an appointment for him to get tested at a CVS. And this is at the time we thought it'd be 3 to 5 days. It ended up being almost 6 days before we could get the results back, but we didn't know. So he came home, came down in the basement and quarantined. And we were like, oh gosh, what does this mean? What does this mean? So we didn't say anything. We're like just sort of waiting. And then Tuesday, Campbell woke up, my youngest, and was like, I'm just really nauseous. And I was like, you eat just junk food. Well, then he went into the bathroom and it was this 2-hour episode of like violent vomiting. And it was like, he's 6'3", he's very, very skinny anyway, but like it pulled back muscles. Like it was like an alien exorcism. I can't describe it in any other way. And he would have to hold on to the toilet so that he didn't crack his head on. It was just that, I've never seen anything like this. And it was northbound and southbound. So it was really like all of a sudden, and he had a couple hours of that, then he went back to bed and then got up and had several more hours of it on the same day. And he was like, Dad, I need to go to the hospital. I can't stop this. So they took a Lowe's paint bucket, the stirring buckets that's like, a couple gallons big. And he had a little fleece blanket and he crammed himself into the car and drove throwing up all the way into the hospital, the Army hospital. And because he's a minor, Noel was allowed to go in with him. So they said, well, this is really strange. We don't know what it is. They gave him anti-nausea meds and some, like 2 bags of IV. And they just precautionarily said, yeah, let's do a COVID test. Because at the time it was all lungs and pneumonia. Nobody really was thinking anything other than shortness of breath. But they thought, well, he's young. It might be weird. So the next day I started getting these weird headaches and I was like sweating, like I picture it's going to be when menopause happens, but just like damp masses of hair, just crazy amounts. And I was like, this is strange. So I would put the heels of my hands by my eyes, and that was the only way I could get the pain to stop. Tylenol didn't help, and I would sleep with my face in the couch cushions just to sleep off the headache. And that was like, and I thought, golly, I'm just like tired, Then Campbell's test came back positive, and Noel started getting headaches and chills too. And we're like, So Thursday I said, I'm going to go get tested. And they assume everybody in the house is positive because testing was short. They didn't have enough. And I kind of insisted on it because I want it to be, Noel's like, I want it in my medical records because I'm in the military. I want this, known. And I did this same thing. And I said, I'm having symptoms. So I feel like we kind of pushed it. And I recognize the privilege of that because, we were at a military facility and I was like, no, I'm having symptoms right now. And they're like, they wanted to kind of go, ma'am, but I was able to get tested. Noel was positive, I was negative, but I still kept having these weird headaches, right? And we learned later, like much later, that not enough virus had built up in me to be able to give a positive result on this test. So now we've got 2 confirmed and 2 pending, or 1 negative and 1 pending. So my headaches got worse and worse. I just slept through the weekend, and COVID comes in waves, right? So whatever it hits you with, you'll have that for a couple of days. It'll like peak, and then it starts to fade, and you think, oh, I'm out of the woods. And then some other symptoms will come, and that does the same thing. So it's just this constant peak and valley. And it messes with your head because you think you'd have no template. There's no, if you've had even pneumonia, you kind of know how it goes. You can tell when you're on the mend. This was like, oh, I feel almost human. And then it just, knocks your legs out from under you. So none of us had a temperature over 99 degrees. I think one of us reached, and it was Ryan, the one who had 0 symptoms after the first day. So I tested positive. I went back on the Monday and I got tested. And so now we all had, Ryan's test came back then too. So we're all 4 positive in the house. Every single one of us had different experiences with it. Ryan was largely asymptomatic after the first day, and was really, he was the one who gave it to us. Campbell had all gastrointestinal things. Like he had no chills, no aches or anything like that, but he couldn't stop with the vomiting. And that went on for like a week. And then he seemed to be fine. Noel had chills, body aches, like massive body, and fatigue like I've never seen before. And we're at 4 months now, and he tires very easily relative to pre-COVID Noel. And it's obvious to my son too. I don't think Noel would want me but I'm like, yeah, we noticed, it's just, it drained him in a way that, and I hear about long-term fatigue for people. And then Campbell was fine for a week and then started getting nauseous again. Like we had to go back to the ER probably 4 times with him. And I'm talking over the period of a couple of months, like 2 or 3 times right up front, and then a couple more times afterwards. And he had a referral to see a gastroenterologist. He's had all kinds of blood work. And he's still seeing the gastroenterologist at periodic intervals because they think that gastritis, which is like inflammation of all of the tubes, is probably a byproduct of this. And there was so much damage that the virus caused that, and also your body slows down with viruses. So regular processes like going to the bathroom or, your hormonal thing, like it just messes with that. So, he was on 4 meds for a while. We keep full prescriptions of each of those meds just in case he needs them, and he doesn't go a day without at least putting his anti-nausea meds near him. I think he's down. He used to have them like for every single meal to keep food down. Now it's more, if he eats a large meal, he'll have to take that, otherwise he has nausea. And like I said, the 12th of October will make 4 months for him.
Wow.
So, and then mine was, I felt like my brain was going to explode. Like there was so much pressure. And right about the end of that, I started seeing where people were going in, having mini strokes or massive strokes, or having brain pressure and having to be put in comas to relieve the brain pressure. And I was like, when you look at WebMD and you diagnose yourself with all the things, I did that, but it was not unreal. Like it wasn't too far from what had happened, and there were 2 nights that were so bad. And I thought, if I was just laying in bed and I couldn't write. I knew when I was sick when I couldn't write, because that to me is like breathing. Even if it's a stupid little Facebook post about my dog, but I didn't have the energy to put words together in a sentence. And that terrified me. And I was like, what if I can't get that back? What if I am not that me ever again? And I don't have that way of being me. And and I know now, like the virus also makes you very emotional. Like you get like all kinds of I was all over the map. But I would lay in bed and I would try, like 2, 3 in the morning, I would try to like map out, all right, when I can finally write about this, what am I going to say? And it was like 3 or 4 days where I couldn't write. And I remember the day that I felt like the clouds parted and I could write, I just cried. I was like so grateful because I still had my brain. I couldn't ask Noel, can you help me walk to the bathroom? I couldn't walk to the bathroom on my own. He had to hold me up while I showered. And I just like leaned with my head against the side of the wall and the water just pouring over me. I've never been like that before. And I get bronchitis and pneumonia like every year. So I'm like, I know what it's like to be, under the weather. But this was something where I thought, and I told him, I said, if we have to go to the hospital because I can no longer remember how to use those words, I don't want you to, if it gets to that point, if something happens, I don't want to be resuscitated. I don't want this to be how I am, like we had these conversations. It was really, and it sounds very melodramatic now. I'm sitting in my comfortable house with a cup of coffee, but it was dark. It was very, very dark for 2 nights, I think was the worst. And then the 3rd night, I thought it's getting a little bit better. But I mean, you have to, I was laying in bed the 2nd night asking myself, all right, if this is it, have I made my peace with do all the people I know and care about, do they know I love them? And I was like listing everybody, like, okay, my mom, I think she knows. All right, my sons, am I in a good spot? Have I left anything undone or unsaid, because it was like that. It was that bad. I've never felt like this before. And that finally broke on the Saturday. And I remember thinking, I can eat and I can think and I can write. And that is all I need right now. That is, so we got better, but it still took another 10 days before I felt like I could walk to the end of my street without needing to sit down, for a break in the middle. Like it took everything out of me. And Campbell, with his symptoms, like we were all finally on the mend, except for being tired. And he was going into his own private hell, it just did not let up for him. There was a point where I outweighed him and I'm like, I am 5'6". This should not be, I mean, I love cake, but come on. So just watching it shred my son and not being able to do anything. And he's 17 years old and he's like, am I ever going to be healthy again? Like that part is so terrifying because you don't know. There is no book on this yet. It's still so new. And then he felt not anger, but just this sort of impotence, like I want my old life back. Like he felt despair, I think was the closest word. And we were really, really worried about that mental state right there because, and when you say things like, I don't know if I'm ever going to feel healthy again. I'm not ever going to be the me I was, so thankfully his doctor was like, you're going to just stay on these meds. And we had to he would come down and sit with me for like 2 hours every morning while he waited for the medication to take effect. And it was hard because I'm like, I'm trying to work and he's like, oh, it's awful. So you're like trying to tell him it's going to be okay. What if it's not? I don't know. And so I don't want to BS him and say it's all fine. But I was like, so at some point, you go from nurturing to being like, remember what it's like when the meds take effect. Like you can do this in these tiny little segments. And my heart goes out to people who are long-term caregivers because it takes a patience that I do not think I had. Um, and finally he did see improvement. It was probably a hard 6 weeks of that, and then he kind of plateaued for a while, and now it is on the daily. He is far better. He's able to eat food now without worrying whether
Mhm.
it's gonna stay down. So
Mhm.
um, but for people who are like, it only kills whatever, a minuscule percent, I'm like, yes, but it didn't take that long to infect us at all. It was literally a half an hour. um we weren't like all hugging on each other. We were in a room, kind of, we didn't have masks on, but we were in a house with people that we're related to. How bad can it be? And then the symptoms stick around for as long as they feel like.
Mhm.
And nobody can tell us if you're immune or how long. And so we're acting like we haven't had it, in terms of our infectiousness to others. um, and we don't know how long these symptoms are going to last for Ryan or for Noel. We don't know. So I'm not willing to take that gamble with my health or my mom's or other people's. We're still doing a lot of quarantining and that sort of thing. But
So, do you know others then? Have you had an opportunity to have a conversation, just share with other people what their experience was?
not so not in our neighborhood. Like we know people who have had it, um, and they were largely asymptomatic or had much better experiences. And I gotta tell you, we live in a economically privileged area. Like we have healthcare, and that is not lost. That when we got COVID, we're like, huh, we don't know anybody else who's had it. Meanwhile, you're hearing like stories about the communities that it is disproportionately impacting because of access to healthcare, because of poverty, because of all those things. And I feel like even now we're in this very sheltered bubble where it's not a reality to a lot of people around us. And I sort of feel like the little old lady who cried wolf. I'm like, this is real. um, because it does hurt people who are already economically and physically vulnerable. So I don't know anybody else personally. I have a couple of students who have lost grandparents to it, which is hard because for that, because they're saying this on a Zoom chat, like, yeah, it's somebody makes a flippant remark and then the other student is like, I lost my grandfather to it 3 weeks ago or whatever. And it's, so we know it's still a couple of degrees of separation
Mhm.
from our community.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I don't know personally anybody, but I would like to. I'd like to, to interact with people. But I'm also like, they have these COVID long hauler websites and stuff, and I'm really nervous about it because it's scary. I don't want to look at it and be like, is this what my son's life is going to be? I want to have. This sounds awful, but I'm leery. As long as we have medical professionals telling us that this is okay, I think he's okay without having to join a community of that.
Mhm. 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 Absolutely. Any words that you want to share to people based on your experience?
Um, get a pulse oximeter. um, and just checking in with people. Like this was the biggest thing. We did not know anybody who had it. And I scoured the internet trying to find, not truth. That sounds so, I looked for truth on the internet and did not find it. But I wanted to find somebody who could talk about it where it wasn't like a hit piece against science or pro science or whatever. I wanted like a person whose judgment I trusted to be like, yo, this is what it was like. You're gonna sweat buckets, and then vomit, and then have rabbits running across your field of vision, and they're not there. So I thought I'm going to write about it when I could. So it started this whole Facebook post thing. Um, and I thought maybe if somebody else gets it, then they could look at that and go, okay, this is, you know, maybe it demystifies it. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just for me when I look at it in my next year's memories that pop up. But I feel like telling people was very empowering, because to do it alone, we had some friends who had it and didn't want to tell anybody because they're like, they're going to judge us. And I was like, I can't, like we talked about before, my insides have to match my outsides. If I'm hiding that, then I am not being authentic, and it just feels awful and lonely. I wanted to not be alone with it. I wanted to share that with somebody. And so
Mhm,
I would recommend that to just personally.
mhm, mhm.
And it adds to our pool of knowledge too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it does feel for most people, or for not most people, a lot of people, like several degrees of separation, and yet at the same time, we are all personally very impacted by this because daily we're having to make choices
Yeah.
about where we go and what we do. And, so it's kind of like a connecting to why, in service of what am I doing this?
Yeah.
You know, um, So, which is part of the reason why I wanted to speak to you about it, because I knew you were open to sharing. And it just seems to add to our collective knowledge and understanding of where we are as a country, a county,
Mhm.
a nation, a world, a planet.
Yep.
So, Catherine Smart, here's my second virtual high five to you. And thanks for sharing your story with me today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, sweetheart.